Hi, everyone. Well, today we've got the director of the IAI, I think Italy's most important think tank, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure everyone already read her Wikipedia page, so I'm not going to introduce her more than that. I just wanted to remind everyone that this week we've got two books. So we're supposed to read the Krastev book and the Tamkin book. So I've been told to remind you guys another time. And without further ado, thank you so much, Dr Tocci. Before asking you any questions, I thought maybe it was a good idea to give you maybe 3 minutes or 4 minutes to just give us some general considerations about the book, and the microphone is yours.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, Maiden, for this. It's a real pleasure to be with you this morning. Yes, I mean, perhaps just a kind of few words as to why I wrote this book before we actually get into the content of it. I basically kind of consider myself to be a bit of a strange animal, in the sense that I don't fully belong to any real professional world, in the sense that, yes, I have an academic background and I'm honorary professor at the University of Tübingen, but I have not had an academic career. Yes, I have worked in institutions, in the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and then since then in EU institutions, first with High Representative Federica Mogherini, now with High Representative Josep Borrell, but I am not a fonctionnaire. I'm not an institutional person. I have had some experience in the private sector. I used to sit on the board of one energy company, and now I sit on the board of another. So I have some experience of private sector work, but I've never worked in a company. And of course, what I have done, sort of since I was, 23, is worked in think tanks. So that is the one consistent bit, in a sense, about what I've done. But then think tank work really is work that cuts across so many different professional fields. So when I had the experience of drafting on behalf of the High Representative the EU Global Strategy, I really felt this was a unique opportunity that was given to me, because I was doing it precisely as someone who was outside of the institutional box. And in a sense, coming from outside, stepping in, and I just kind of felt when that experience was over that it was really kind of important for me to give something back to that outside world from which I come. So it is really a book sort of written with this inside-outside perspective, which was, as I said, the main reason why I decided to write it.
So perhaps the first question we would like to ask you is, our members have actually gone through many of the other interviews and other talks you did on your book, and we noticed a common theme, which is that almost all the time you seem to talk about the lack of action. Well, actually, the last page of your book also tries to emphasize the importance of action, and how you would like your plan to be put in action in a certain sense. And how, if I am not mistaken, in one talk you actually say that for the SGP, it wasn't even necessary to have so many contingency plans, and often action itself was all that was needed. I was wondering if you could give us some examples of action that could have been taken. Perhaps 3 examples of action that could have been taken in your opinion, if that's an appropriate question.
I mean, to me, what I would say that what was really important and what did not happen was to take action on at least one crisis. So there has been a lot of talk, and in fact, I would say that all the major, sort of the first major impulse to have a global strategy was really the observation that we were living in a fundamentally different world from the world that we used to live in back in 2003, when the European security strategy was written. Back then we used to think of a world which had never been so prosperous, so secure, and so free. When we started thinking about the global strategy, which was basically in 2014, 2015, obviously that world had gone. And it had gone because, many other things had happened, ending up with the pandemic. But already in 2014, 2015, the first thing that really shocked us into this kind of, new awareness was the fact that there was, the annexation of Crimea, the destabilization of Ukraine, the Arab, once upon a time, spring, which had turned into winter, the war in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, etc. So, in a sense, the global strategy was at least partly, not only, but partly a response to all of this. And so what I would have liked to see happen was that if at least on one of these crises, the EU actually took more responsibility. And that didn't happen. I think, in fairness, other things did happen. I think in fairness, we have started working in a more joined up way across the development and security fields. I think that now we look at areas like trade and investment, not only through an exclusive economic lens, but also through a wider political lens. Just think about how all this interacts in our debates about China, for example. So, I don't want to be too harsh. I think in a number of ways, the EU is actually waking up to a new reality, and many things are being done. But on that more traditional, in a sense, security and defense field, I would have definitely like to see more action in terms of actually acting on the crisis. And I would say that at the end of the day, the way in which the European Defence Fund was scaled down in terms of ambition was well below expectations. Let me put it this way. It's one of these things, do you see the glass half full or half empty? And, European integration always moves in small steps. But having said this, having raised the expectation and then having halved it would be, in a sense, my second disappointment. And then I would say my third disappointment is in another aspect of the joined up neck of the woods, and it's migration. We talk a lot about a joined up policy, the way in which internal, external policies have to be better connected. When it comes to migration, all the focus has been on external migration policy, and in particular, externalizing European responsibilities, mainly to countries of transit. Just think about the relationship, for instance, with Turkey. I think my third, and in many respects first, disappointment was the fact that when it comes to the internal dimensions of migration and asylum policy, no progress at all has been made. So that's my top three.
Thank you. Well, I think I should pass to a more light question, because that was maybe a bit heavy as a question. Because during your talks, you often talk about how you took a more, how could I say it, a more open approach, and you put together a lot of different ideas, a lot of small pieces, and we were wondering what was the most surprising input that you got, because I remember hearing you said something like 50 different conferences were done in different countries, and you had also got some essays from students, and I was wondering what was the most surprising aspect, the most perhaps interesting for you as the author of the EUGS, EUGS I think I could call it, or EUGS as some people say.
I would say the most surprising, not so much in terms of content, which was, in a sense, not that kind of, different from what maybe was already kind of in the text, or I was already kind of, we were already thinking about. But in terms of who it was coming from, was actually, and I'm going to get this wrong, because I can't remember exactly what the name of the association is, but it's basically the sort of organization, the association of churches in Europe. And I mean, frankly speaking, I wasn't even aware that they were aware that we were working on an EU global strategy. And to kind of think that there were kind of European churches, it was both, it was kind of, you know, cross-confessional, so it was kind of both Protestant and Catholic. It was Christian. But I was really quite surprised to see that there was an interest, even in a world that had not, to be honest, crossed my mind in these issues. I thought was really quite interesting. And in terms of the content, I mean, as you can imagine, it was a lot of emphasis on kind of, you know, human rights and migration and, you know, sort of intercultural and interreligious dialogue. I mean, you know, the kind of issues that you would imagine. But in terms of the direction that it was coming from, I thought it was a nice surprise.
This is a question that just came to the top of my mind. What do you think was a question that you would have liked to have been asked but wasn't asked? Like something that you really liked about your book, something that you thought was really important but no one ever asked about it. It's just a question that came to mind.
I guess it was, there has been very little attention to the way in which non-Europeans were engaged in this process. You know, that's, you know, in terms of the method that was followed in writing the strategy, there was a lot of emphasis on, you know, how we involved member states at different levels and, you know, think tanks and universities and students, and but all very European. I mean, not as much attention as I would have liked, in a sense, being placed on how and why we engaged non-Europeans into this. You know, why the Japanese and the Australians and the Georgians as opposed to others, you know. I mean, the answer to the question is a lot of it was kind of ad hoc, to be completely honest with you, you know, and a lot of it was also in response to the interest on the side of kind of third countries vis-a-vis the EU. But there was a very interesting dimension to this that hardly anyone really asked, which was really about why were particular countries interested? Was it just an interest in the EU, or was it also an interest because they themselves, and this is the right answer, they themselves were actually working on revisions of their own strategies, and they were interested in understanding how Europeans went about this. So on everything that has to do with, if you like, a more outside-in view rather than an inside-out view, there's been relatively less attention.
So the first part of your book actually talks a bit about how the EUGS, or the EUGS, was formed. And I was wondering if you could tell us some stories about the bureaucratic infighting, if there was any. Because like usually we students, we used to be students, hear a lot about bureaucratic infighting and all of these the Mandarin fights, and we were just wondering if you had any interesting anecdotes from this that you can tell us, obviously.
Sure. I would say that in this respect, I was lucky to the extent that basically, if you take the first period after the Lisbon Treaty, so the sort of, you know, 2000, basically 9, 10, through to, you know, 2014 period, this was really a time of, I think, very acute interinstitutional infighting. It was because the Lisbon Treaty had just come into being. The European External Action Service had been created, and there was this sense of, you know, what is this European External Action Service? You know, I mean, is it taking power away from the Commission in bringing it closer towards member states? So that was the context. And I think it was a very destructive context. Once we get to 2014, there was this temporary, unfortunately it was only temporary, but I was lucky because I fell into that temporary space, yeah, sense of let's kind of temporarily rest our, arms, and the whole spirit of the joined up approach was really aimed at saying, can we actually work together? So there was a moment in which, we were working on this that was really I was really quite lucky, I felt, because I don't think that even now, I think that now we're not in that stage anymore. I think we're back into the sort of institutional turf wars phase. The main problem that I had less to do with institutional turf wars amongst one another, and more to do with the fact that I personally did not belong to any one of those institutions. And so perhaps, a couple of anecdotes on this. I mean, I remember when I started working on this project, so to speak, there were two phases. The first phase in which I was asked to work on a so-called strategic assessment, and the second phase in which there was going to be the strategy itself. And the first phase was coming to an end, and we were having discussions as to how to organize the work for the second stage, which was obviously going to be the more important one. I remember having sort of several exchanges with, sort of a person fairly high up in the European External Action Service that kept on coming back to me saying that, how about establishing an editorial committee? And he kept on talking about this editorial committee and editorial committee. And I didn't really understand why he was talking about an editorial committee. And of course, I did understand. I mean, he wanted to involve other people, yeah? And so, it kind of got to a point where I really felt I had to tell him that, this wasn't going, it wasn't Natalie deciding, by the way, it was the High Representative. But so this is why I knew I could say this, that there wasn't going to be an editorial committee. And I remember when I said this, the shock on his face when he said, well, what do you mean? I mean, do you think are you going to write it? I said, yes. And there was total shock. And he said to me, well, what if you get ill? And I just thought, this is just incredible, here comes by this stage, probably, 64, 60, 65-year-old man, who's telling me, at the time I was what, 39, 40, and he's telling me that, like, what happens if I get ill? And I don't know whether it was simply a question of, was it gender, was it age, or was it also institutions? It was the fact that, given that I did not belong to an institution, I was not going to be very easily controlled. And institutions kind of don't feel comfortable with that. To an extent, it's, by the way, a healthy kind of instinct, yeah, because you can have loose cannons all over the place. But that was definitely, if you like, one of my most memorable kind of moments in this experience.
I should also mention that your paper was actually, I'm not sure if I could call it a white paper. It's the first European strategic document after the Lisbon Treaty, and as perhaps it's going to be the only European document for the next, I don't know, maybe 7 years probably. And perhaps a more, I'm not sure if I could call it a personal question, but do you think that the fact that both of you, both the High Representative and you, were so young and women, do you think it had an important role, as in, do you think you were able to bring some new perspectives, and do you think it played an important role, the fact that you're both young and women? Do you think, I'm not sure if the question was clear. It's just
absolutely.
Because most of these...
yeah, and my answer to your question is yes. And it's yes because, you know, it's about, I mean, it's connected to what I was saying earlier in a sense. I mean, it's yes, it's about age, it's about gender, but it's also about institutions. I mean, there was, I think, a readiness, a willingness, an openness to doing things in a different way, you know, and so an openness in not necessarily assuming that a document had to be written by following the usual institutional kind of, you know, procedures. And unfortunately, if you do follow those, you know, normal institutional procedures, you end up with different content. Inevitably, you end up with different content. So I would say that it was important, not so much because, you know, God knows what bright ideas I may have had, but because by following a more unconventional process, you get to kind of fresher ideas and a fresher way of writing things, you know, which would not have happened had we done things the normal way. You know, who is basically, but be it because of age, because of, you know, background, who is used to doing things in a certain way is inevitably less willing to change. Who has never done something in a particular way, in a sense, comes at it, you know, with it's more of a yeah, I mean, it's more of a blank slate. I mean, you know, you can start, you're more open to considering alternatives.
We're almost up with our time, so I'm going to ask you a couple of shorter questions. I'm just going to choose. All right, so this is a really soft question. Do you think what happened at Sofagate was actually important? I'm not sure if you... Actually, you know about it because you tweeted about it. We researched it pretty well.
Yes, I think it's important in several respects, by the way, and some of which have been given more attention to others. I think it's important because obviously something like this would not have received the attention that it did had it not been for the fact that Turkey withdrew from the Istanbul Convention. I don't know if you... Can you hear me, by the way? You've frozen. Oh, can you hear me?
I can hear you. I don't know what's happening. I think it's because we're using the Wi-Fi.
I don't know if you lost me. Yeah, I mean, if you can hear me now. So I think it's important because, as I said, I don't think this would have received the attention that it did had it not been for the fact that Turkey withdrew from the Istanbul Convention on preventing violence against women only, you know, what, a couple of weeks ago. So it was important because of the context. I think it was, and so in a sense, it kind of reinforces the sense of how Turkey has been going astray on a number of issues concerning rights, human rights, including gender rights. I think it was important also because, actually, and this goes more to the EU than to Turkey itself, in a sense, the way the Turkish president behaved was not particularly surprising to me. What was far more surprising, and unpleasantly so, was the way in which the European Council president behaved. You know, I mean, faced with that situation, surely he should have let the Commission president sit on that only chair. So, you know, unfortunately, I think this, you know, it's not only Erdogan that does not come out very well from this affair. And I think thirdly, and this sort of really is I think it's important the way in which, I mean, I think it should give us reason to reflect the fact that it has received so much noise. I mean, yes, it was kind of an incident, but I mean, to be honest, there are worse things in this world, yeah, than a chair. But the fact that it did receive so much attention, and the fact that I would say, you know, normally, and I have incredible amount of respect and admiration for my own prime minister, but the fact that he used, I think, a rather inappropriate term to refer to the Turkish president, in a sense, to me, signals the fact that as Europeans, we've become unable to have a rational, cool-headed debate about Turkey. So I think it's important also in this respect. In none of these ways, it's important in a positive way, but it's important in a rather negative way.
What I think you also meant to say was it's not just a diplomatic squabble, because just to put everything in context, I think Draghi said that Erdogan was a dictator, and I think you pointed out that he was elected, and he's been winning votes since 2002. And,
yeah, that's what I mean. That's what I mean. I think he's many things. I think he's authoritarian. I think he's chauvinist. I think he's nationalist. I think he's undemocratic. I mean, I could go on, using all sorts of kind of words and adjectives. But Turkey's not a dictatorship. I mean, if Erdogan is a dictator, what is, I don't know, Kim Jong-un? I mean, you know, we need to kind of weigh words, you know. So he's authoritarian, absolutely. But is Turkey a dictatorship? Is a country where the three biggest cities are controlled by the opposition a dictatorship? As I said, and I don't say this because, you know, I have unfortunately many friends in Turkish jails, you know, so I have no soft words for the Turkish president, but I think we need to give words their meaning, and I don't think that Turkey is a dictatorship.
I'll just cut everything down to the last question. Thank you so much for your time. I know we've gone slightly over the 20 minutes we asked you for. Our last question would be, what do you think are the three main ideas you would like your reader to remember? So like the three main things you want us to remember from your book, or even from the EUGS or the EUGS. Yeah.
I would say kind of, you know, point one is, you know, the need for Europeans together, because it can only be together, to take greater responsibility in this world. And you can talk about it in terms of European autonomy, in terms of, we use the words that you want, but basically we've got to stick together and we need to take more responsibility in the world. That would be, if you like, point one. Point two, we will only be able to do so if we live by our values internally. So democracy, human rights, rule of law, that, as well as obviously, you know, economic development, addressing inequalities, I mean, you know, that is the real source of our strength and our resilience internally, and we can only hope to have that responsibility and role in the world if we live up to it internally. And then thirdly, I would say it's really this piece about multilateralism and cooperation and partnership. We will only be able to do all this by working with others. And therefore principled pragmatism, to me, is the sort of key philosophy, if you like, of the global strategy, which is about living by your principles, but doing so pragmatically, working with others in the rest of the world in order to live by your principles and achieve your objectives.
Thank you so very much. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And I'm just going to remind everyone that we've got 2 books to read this week, so everyone should start. And thank you so much. Thank you again.
Thank you. Lovely talking to you.
Lovely talking to you. Bye.
Bye. Bye.